Good afternoon, and here we come again. It's our midweek Bible study, of course. We're still in the book of Ephesians and we're in chapter 5. This is going to be our last Bible study before we get into lockdown 2. It will be an interesting one. I'm delivering this before we get into the conversations because some of them I suspect will be good and I hope a bit of fun. I did nominate a guy in the church a couple of weeks back called Pete to deliver this one. It's instructions for Christian households, and mysteriously Pete has an appointment that he has to attend and he can't come today. So if you're watching this on YouTube, Pete, thanks. Ephesians chapter 5 and 21 through to the end, verse 33. We've come, of course, from the instructions on Christian living for the individuals, and we're going to instructions for Christian households, and it is a difficult subject to enter, particularly in the context of the time that we are in. Modern society demands that we are all equal in this world, and that is right, and they should demand that in its own right and sense. In the eyes of God, who created us, He loves every one of His children equally, of course, and He shows no favour as far as His grace, mercy, love, or indeed anything goes in His perfect righteousness and love. As we read, we will read that, as we do all over the scriptures, that He gives each one a place in His kingdom work, a role to play, and this is where things become difficult and sometimes, because of human nature, contentious. We place importance upon position, prestige, authority, perceived power, but the truth is that all of these things belong to and they come from God. And we've seen in previous studies here in the church, of course, that God has a hierarchy, even in the realms of heaven. And He equips everyone to play their part and bring everything together for the good of the whole. This is something we're going through on the Sunday mornings in part also. And it's right that it is His right, and only He has the wisdom and the authority to do this with righteousness. And every Christian ought to be thankful for our place and our role in His will. We should be privileged and honoured to be gifted and to be called to serve in the kingdom of the King, the Creator, the ruler of the universe. These instructions that we're going to embark upon, they can be difficult and in and out of context, but they're very, very important. The first and ultimate example of Christ at work comes, of course, from the individual, and we've just looked at that, but then it comes to how we relate as a family in the household. One final thought I would share with you for this introduction to this part of the letter is this: that the principles that we are looking at are in no way a given right to any abusive husbands, parents, anyone in any kind of position of authority. And thankfully, praise be to God, that He gave the apostle the wisdom to make it clear that that kind of person would then become the abuser, if you like, and what should be happening to them, with them, how they should be treated. We have checks and balances, of course, throughout Scripture on taking those who abuse power and position, those who mistreat other human beings and others in the Christian faith, and how we have a responsibility to deal with such matters. So I want to put that out there before we enter into these verses. So let's do that. Let's go to verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, the first thing we need to understand is the word submit. Here is a quote for you: submitting. The word submitting here literally means to be under in rank. It is a military word. There is no self-importance, of course, in the military ranks. It is not a case of gifts, talents or intelligence. It is a rank. It is an authority. It is setting self aside to serve the greater gain, and all of these principles brought together in the military as it stands. And in the faith, that is how we are to serve the Lord under His appointment and to advance His kingdom. Every member is equal in importance when fulfilling their role for the Lord. Here is another couple of quotes for you. Anyone who has served in the armed forces knows that rank has to do with order and authority, not with value or ability. We also see from this how important it is to be under rank in the military. They have a name for it when you no longer want to be under rank. They call it mutiny. Just as an army will be in confusion if there were no levels of authority, so society would be in chaos without submission. Every one of us has greater intelligence or lesser intelligence, different gifts in one way or another in various circumstances, and God uses people's characters and natures, the strengths and abilities which He Himself gave, of course, alongside the spiritual gifts which He Himself determines to bring everything under His authority and control to work as one. The wisest and the strongest among us are actually those who know their role and they serve it well as they are called to do it and not as they want to do or as they want to be. So Paul says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That is to, let me quote to you, Hebrews 13, verse 17 says, have confidence in your leaders, submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. Some would have taken that verse, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, and then there is no order, there's no rank, there's no position, there's no authority, etc. Submitting to one another is not a get out or a contradiction to the scriptural principles and instructions. We need to understand what Paul meant before we can advance, and we must do so with that verse from Hebrews, and I could have picked many others stating the same principle of authority and rank and position, etc., throughout the scriptures. An army is filled with individuals, but they can never be individual in their thinking. The first thing that's taken from a person or broken off from them when they join the army is that individual thinking. One commentator says, let no man be so tenacious of his own will or his opinion in matters indifferent as to disturb the peace of the church. And all such matters give way to each other, and let love rule. Our love of the Lord must come before our love of ourselves. Our own ideas of self-importance and what, how and why we think something, all of that must come second to our love and reverence for the Lord. So we are to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Reverence for Christ, or fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is actually a very good thing. Something is painted as a negative. It's a very good thing. It's if you think of it as this, it's fear of falling from a great height that draws us back from the edge of a cliff, for instance. It is fear of being burned that draws us back from the heat of a flame as we draw closer to it, and it's that fear of falling to the same kind of fate, or of being stolen away from the gracious love and mercy of the Lord, that should be driving us. Reverence for Christ. When we revere, love and respect someone, we have a fear of disappointing them or letting them down or hurting them. It is for these reasons that we learn to submit to one another under the authority of God. Remember that the Father and the Son are one, and yet the Son submitted to the Father and His will as He went to the cross. Remember the outcome of that will and that obedience. It was salvation for you. It was mercy for you. It was grace for you. It was favour for all people. The setting aside of division, superiority, inequality for all mankind. All of these things that the world craves. Christ gave his will up to that of the Father in order to achieve it. And this is why we submit in reverence to Christ, with love for God and his ways. So that's the first verse. Now we have 22, 3 and 4. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Saviour. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now here is why I say thanks, Pete, for your appointment, and here we go. Let me read this quote to you from Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. The danger is that we should think of marriage amongst Christians as essentially the same as it is with everybody else. The only difference being that these two people happen to be Christians, whereas the others are not. Now, if that is still our conception of marriage when we have considered this great paragraph entirely in vain, Christian marriage, the Christian view of marriage, is something that is essentially different from all views. Christian marriage and the household is to be held up as the example to all the world of the relationship between God and his people. We are the living example of that which is to come, of course, the day when we are called as the bride of the King of the universe to join him at the marriage feast. It's no coincidence that Paul first emphasized the principle of submission before he embarks upon these instructions, and then emphasizes that we submit as the church should be submitting to Christ. Here is another quote for you. Submission does not mean inferiority. As well, submission does not mean silence. Submission means submission. There is a mission from the Christian marriage, and that mission is obeying and glorifying God. The wife says, I'm going to put myself under that mission. That mission is more important than my individual desires. I'm not putting myself below my husband, I'm putting myself below the mission God has for our marriage, for my life. We will get to husbands. So submit yourself to your own husbands. As it always is, always has been, and always will be, there is free will. There is a need to make a choice and to take an action. And Paul says here, submit yourself. Husbands have no authority to take matters into their own hands, so to speak. Wives should make the choice as they would do to the authority of the Lord and out of their love for him as they walk in the light of his grace and favour. And these instructions extend to one man in one household, not all men, and not across all of society, in your workplace and in the shops or in a club or whatever you may be. Submit yourselves to your own husband, and that is where the line is drawn. He goes on to say, for the husband is the head of the wife. Now, Paul's message here is consistent with all of Scripture, regardless of what modern society and thinking may say. The thought is this, that Adam was created first to be under God and in a relationship with him. Eve was created from him, as a part of him, to be an able helper, not a hindrance, but a good companion. I take you back to that verse from Hebrews chapter 13, not to hinder, that would be of no good to you. So we're looking again at the structure of God, which he himself set. Wives should submit to their husbands in everything is another big statement that has been used and abused over the years by men and their depravity. It's a big statement, but it needs to be taken in its context. This is not to feed the ego of men. It's not to put them in a position of authority where they can use and abuse their wives to fulfill their every whim and desire. It's an instruction that comes under the authority of God and the fullness of his morality, his will, and his love for us. Head as the head as Christ is of the church is the punchline to it. Everything Christ asks of us is completely in line with God's will and way. So this instruction of submit to your husbands in every way does not give the husband the right to ask or demand of the wife to do pretty much anything. Christ never asks us of anything that would be in any way sinful, lead us towards sin, temptation. It is in submission to that thought as the church submits to Christ. There is no get out here for men to send wives into anything that is harmful, endangering, immoral, degrading, any of these things. It's always and only in line with the work, the will, and the way and the grace of God. Christ asks us to do nothing that would be degrading or harmful to us. Always only that which is holy, right, and pure, and he does so with absolute care and compassion for us, helping and enabling us as we go. And so it should be with the submission of the wives and the husbands. Let's go to verse 25, 6 and 7. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Husbands, love your wives. Now, as we know, there are 4 words in the Greek in the Bible for love, and 3 of them, eros, storge, and philia, are words based upon they're words based upon feelings and emotions. We have eros, erotic love, that is between a man and a woman. We have storge, which is a family love between, for example, a parent and a child, or 2 members of a family. And we have philia, members of brotherly love, friendship of the highest in that form of love. Here Paul uses the 4th, agape, which is love akin to the love which God pours upon us. And this is not so much based upon emotions. It doesn't change with mood. It's a choice. It's an action. It's an attitude of the mind, and men are to love their wives with that love as Christ loved the church. Let's look at that. Consider the treatment of humanity toward Christ. Consider the disobedience, the failures toward Christ, and consider that Christ himself said, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you?" And this was him speaking to his own disciples. Did this change his love? Did he still give himself for those very same people to make them holy? Christ viewed the church as the most precious of things. He gave himself for her good, to present her holy, spotless, and blameless, washed through the word, to present her to his God. We find no selfishness, we find no self-promotion, we find no misleading into anything other than all that is pure and good. And that is how the husband should be toward the wife, to hold them up above everything, above themselves, like the most precious of things in their life, up holy and spotless, leading them in that life and nothing else. Verse 28 and 29 says, "In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church." So it is then with the same powerful, perfect, selfless love of Christ, husbands are to love their wives. As a man would love, feed, care for himself, a husband must be so with his wife, as Christ did for him. If this high example, this high expectation, It's at least as strong an instruction as is given to the wife, if not more so. If it's not held up, then the man himself is guilty, and the husband has been given a privileged position, but it comes with equal responsibility to know God in His way, to know God in His love, and to treat his wife as the most precious gem and gift that she is, and that has come from God Himself. Let's see these last verses. For we are members of His body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Let's just look at this as a conclusion and a summary. A reminder of God's original intention and setup. A reminder that His ways may be a mystery in part, but He doesn't leave us blind to His intention. The two are to become one in marriage, in the household and the family of Christ. We are all of the one body, working equally and in harmony, working together under His direction, and we do so with love and respect for one another and our position, not as a hindrance to one another, chasing after our own self-importance. We do this because of our love for God and the reverence for Christ and His example and what He gave for us. This is a summary and a conclusion of what could go on so much in so many different directions, of course. It's a challenge. It is the truth. And I'm going to close with this one little quote. When we are filled with the Spirit, it will show by our mutual submission to each other, and the submission will be done in the fear of God and not the fear of man. Forget modern society and its dictates, forget its highfalutin ideas, and live in fear of God, with reverence for Christ, and hold each other up in that same precious love.